Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers, located here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We're broadcasting tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We have an excellent conversation ahead of you. We're here tonight to celebrate this new book by Kazim Ali, Northern Light, Power, Land, and Memory of Water, published by Goose Lane Editions. Your host tonight is Michael Hutchinson, and I'll be introducing both of them in just a moment, right after I go over procedure for the evening. So over the course of the evening, there'll be a conversation between your host and the featured author, and then following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. Feel free to enter questions as they occur to you in the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom of the screen. That'll allow Michael to locate them very easily when it comes time for that portion of the evening. I'd also like to point out that copies of Northern Light and, of course, also Michael Hutchinson's Mighty Muskrat Mysteries are available from McNally Robinson Booksellers, either in person, online, over the phone. We deliver nationally, internationally, and even locally. We'll hop in a car and bring it to your home. But without further ado, I'll introduce the participants in this evening because we do have an excellent night ahead of you. So first of all, author Kazim Ali was born in the United Kingdom to Muslim parents of Indian, Iranian, and Egyptian descent, and has lived transnationally in the United States, Canada, India, France, and the Middle East. A celebrated poet, editor, and prose writer, he is the author of 7 poetry collections, 2 novels, and 3 works of fiction, or nonfiction. He teaches at the University of California, San Diego. Your host, Michael Hutchinson, is a citizen of the Pimicikamak Cree Nation in the Treaty 5 territory, north of Winnipeg. As a teen, he pulled nets on Lake Winnipeg, fought forest fires in the Canadian Shield, and worked as a bartender, a caterer for rock concerts and movie shoots, and eventually as a print reporter for publications such as the Calgary Straight and Aboriginal Times. Since then, he has worked for the Indian Claims Commission in Ottawa as a writer, as the Director of Communications for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, as a project manager for the Treaty Relations Commissions of Manitoba, where he helped create the We Are All Treaty People campaign, and as host of APTN National News. He has worked for advocacy organizations such as the Assembly of First Nations and the Manitoba Kowetanokokamaganak, and is currently a co-host on CTV Morning Live Winnipeg. His greatest accomplishments are his 2 lovely daughters. So please join me in welcoming Kazim Ali and Michael Hutchinson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. And I'm really, really glad to be doing this event with Michael Hutchinson, who also grew up in Jenpeg with me, as we discovered live on the air. And later, after we were live on the air, Michael discovered that we were actually standing next to each other in our grade 1 class picture. So it was like a reunion. And yeah. Tonight, we actually know that we knew each other back then. So I wanted to start with just a very short reading from the book, and then we're going to just get into a conversation chat. And this very short chapter is where I've actually arrived at the airport of Perimeter Aviation in Winnipeg. And I'm waiting for my plane, my little prop plane, my 12-seat prop plane, to fly me up to Cross Lake. And that's this little chapter. And it's kind of representative of the book in that it includes kind of more personal reflection or memoir. And it also includes the story, a more journalistic writing about the people that I was meeting, and also includes some historical background. So it's kind of a blend. In Winnipeg, I take a cab from the international airport through the residential neighborhood that surrounds it to the private airport of Perimeter Aviation, a regional company that uses an old runway of the main airport to service daily flights to First Nations communities in northern Manitoba. The terminal has the dimensions of a bus station in a small town, perhaps, and the runway is no bigger than a high school athletic field. It doesn't have to be very big for the 12-seat propeller planes that fly out of here to Cross Lake, Norway House, Nelson House, Split Lake, and York Factory, the main northern communities. For the first time, I feel like I am in a space other than normative Canadian space. The art on the walls here by Indigenous artists depicts The trees and lakes I remember so well, and also the mountains of the West. The colors are green and brown, and the animals and people depicted in the paintings all call to mind the landscapes of the North. Nearly everyone waiting in the station is an Indigenous person, and they are all speaking to each other in their own languages. No one is speaking English except when they go up to the ticket counter. I realize that the airline, which is not an Indigenous owned business, is consciously trying to create an Indigenous themed atmosphere here in the middle of Winnipeg, a border zone between this place called Canada and the communities that they will fly us to. On the wall, there is a map of Winnipeg, and I find Bishop Grandin Boulevard. It was near that major artery that the houses of my family clustered. Before we moved north to Jenpeg, my father and mother had a small house at 317 River Road in the St. Vital neighborhood, and my mother's eldest sister lived down the road close to the park at number 106. At first, my grandparents and my mother's younger brother, Sufter, lived in rooms that my handy father constructed in our basement. But later on, my grandparents and Sufter moved into the house at 23 Harmony Cove, just behind Bishop Grandin Boulevard. In addition to my grandparents and uncle, I had another uncle who also lived in that house before moving north to Thompson. And another uncle, Dorab, moved into a house nearby on St. Anne's Place. And a year later, my mother's middle sister, Joffrey, and my father's middle brother, Delaware, who, yes, were married to each other, moved into a house around the corner at 168 Sterling Avenue. Another of my mother's sisters lived just a half hour away with her husband, an agricultural scientist. As in any migrant family, everyone was doing what they could to make do. Softer, who had a degree in accounting, was delivering circulars from the back of his big blue van. My uncle Delaware worked as a night security guard, while my aunt Joffrey cooked in a restaurant. Bolstered by her customers' enthusiastic response to her cooking, she began preparing her famed nimbu achar in bulk and bottling it to sell at the local Safeway. The grocery store manager, perhaps wanting to market the spicy lime pickle to as wide a Canadian market as possible, changed the brand name, printing bright green stickers that read Jeffrey's. I traced Bishop Grandin Boulevard on the map with my finger. That was also the road my grandfather, Sajjad Saeed, died on. In July of 1980, while crossing the street on one of his constitutional walks, he was struck by a vehicle. How unfair. He wandered across the world and then came here to this strange city for just a few brief years, walking in the summer, rambling through the neighborhood like he used to. Who was the driver who struck him? And where is that man now? What happened to him? As far as I remember, no one in my family has ever talked about this. Maybe we don't know. Our history is scattered across continents. As for the man for whom the street was named, Vital Justin Grandin was one of the French bishops who supported religious conversions among the Indigenous peoples of Manitoba and one of the earliest supporters of the residential school system. He believed it was vital to make sure that Indigenous children, quote, forget the customs, habits, and language of their ancestors. I wonder whether my father and the other engineers or any of the white people who lived and worked in Jenpeg ever wondered about what happened in the 40 years that have followed since the dam's construction. Did anyone before me go back? And if they went back, did they go to the Jenpeg town site only? Did any of them get as far as Cross Lake? In the airport terminal bathroom, there is a bin for biomedical waste filled about 6 inches deep with discarded needles, I am assuming for insulin. Besides the historic health challenges posed to Indigenous communities by disease and substance abuse, I have learned that because of the relatively recent and rapid changes in the traditional diets of Indigenous peoples, nearly 30% of adults in Cross Lake suffer from diabetes, compared with less than 5% of the general population of Manitoba. Children as young as 7 years old are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the adult onset variety of the disease. It's eerie being back in Winnipeg. I haven't thought of the place in so long, but I realized that for me, the air is still thick with the memories of my family. My younger sister was born here. My grandfather died here and is buried here. And my uncle Thurab is buried here too. He was a mechanic who also lived and worked in Jenpeg for a while during our time there and for a year or two after. Is this how people who live in the same place their whole lives feel all the time, that the earth and air around you holds your history? We are waiting to board in the small gate area past the single security checkpoint. No one has been able to tell me whether there are roads now from Cross Lake to the old site of Jenpeg. I know that in the old days when we lived there, there weren't. At this time of year, the lake will not be frozen. People used to drive across the frozen lake in the old days to get from Cross Lake to Jenpeg. Before we pull out, the co-pilot hands out foam earplugs for us to wedge into our ears. The plane lifts up over green forests towards Lake Winnipeg, which stretches from here all the way to Norway House and Cross Lake. Looking down over the landscape as we fly north, it is no wonder my childhood memories are so filled with water. It's everywhere you look. The silver threads of the Red River and the Assiniboine meeting and swirling into tarnished gleam. And then north of the city, the great blue dark of Lake Winnipeg fills our vision. Rain begins to fall. We climb higher. So that's me on my way to Cross Lake.
Well, thanks for that, brother. Just for the sake of our audience, can you say your first name really quick? Because we're going to be using it a lot.
Yes, it's Kazim.
Okay, Kazim. Okay, Kazim, thank you, sir. Can you tell us a little bit about, maybe not when you landed now, but the first time you landed in Jenpeg, and I have lots of memories of the town. I'd like to hear a few of yours off the cuff, not from the book, maybe.
The first time I landed in Jenpeg, you're talking about back in the day.
What was your experience at Jenpeg?
Yeah, I mean, 1977. Wow. Yeah. One of the things that was really amazing to me, of course, Michael, is that there we are. Oh my God. Yeah. Top right. And then right in front of me. So that's Michael and me. And right in front of me is my friend, Jason Gilmore, who's out there on the call tonight, listening in. And yeah, that's amazing. Look at those clothes that we were wearing.
Yeah, there was a lot of, there's a lot of Russians up there at the time.
Yeah, there's like some pretty good style, actually.
Mrs. Collins was our teacher.
Yeah, it was a Miss Collins.
Miss Collins, yes,
yeah.
Sorry. I'm not certain if she's a Mrs. yet, but.
You know what was amazing was that I did not have I had barely any memories. They were very, very fleeting memories, until I went back and went up there and went into the forest. And it's sort of like all of this stuff came rushing back to me. It was very strange in that way, that the experience was still so physical and real. Like it was all waiting up there for me to rediscover. And one of the main dramas of this book is like the idea of not having a home at all, which of course is so complicated for both the immigrant and the indigenous, that that home in certain ways is denied to both from the national space in between that space of Canada that's pushing one out to make space for itself, and then regulating the other one coming in, to move into that. So it's almost, that's a double bind, I think. But what do I remember of Jenpeg from when I was there? I remember this very, very vibrant little place. I mean, I remember all of our friends in school and, being able to come and go, like just, we weren't allowed to go in the woods. I remember that because there were animals in the woods.
Yeah.
We had to stay in town, I do remember that part. So it was a little bit like that. What is that M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village? Have you seen that movie?
No,
where they're like, they have to stay in the village. They're not allowed to go in the forest around it. It's kind of like a horror type of situation.
I believe you.
Yeah. But beyond those, and I remember the sky.
Yeah. Well, and back then you could still buy a comic and some candy at the general store there. I was going to the store and the general store, and Jenpeg was a company town.
Yeah.
For the people watching. And so, my experience was a little different. In the book, I'm going to say your name wrong. Kazim?
Awesome.
Kazim.
Michael wants to say Kazim, which is
Yes.
it's okay. You can say it's all right. It's all right.
Kazim.
You got it. You got it.
Yes, Kazim. My experience was a little different than yours, I guess, because, you know, I was a First Nation person going up to Jenpeg. It was a company town. And, you know, you breathed the rarefied air of Highboard, which was where all the managers and you know, the upper echelon lived. I lived close to the bush in the trailer on First Street. So, you know, as far as the hierarchy of Jenpeg went, we were very different. And, you know, my experience was of my parents, you know, wondering if I would be allowed to go to school there because I was First Nation.
Because you were First Nations. And you said in the beginning, so what did your dad do on the dam? What was his?
My dad at that time was at the beginning of his career. So that was one of the reasons why we were, you know, at the lower, and he was a surveyor at that time. He eventually became an engineer. But at that time he was at the beginning of the career. And
you said in the beginning he would canoe in. I mean, he wasn't.
Well, when my mom met him, he's actually my stepdad. When my mom met my stepdad, he, you know, I don't use that term, he's my dad. When my mom met my dad, he was living in a shack about 10 kilometers away from Jenpeg with no electricity on Whiskey Jack Lake. And yeah, he would canoe into work. He's a white guy, but I think he may have read a little bit too much Farley Mowat or something like that because he's a survivalist. But yeah, when he started dating my mom and my mom moved into him, he had to get a trailer in town. You know, and the trailer, like I said, ours was close to the bush, so we went out in the bush. I remember the Michael and Tom, Johansson had a fort out there, and they used to trap squirrels, and then they put dead squirrel parts around their fort. So I remember going out there. It was between the road, you know, where the main road is, you know, how it kind of swung around, and the town. So there was that stretch of bush, and their fort was in that stretch of bush.
Wow, yeah, there were all kinds of little secret areas, and I do remember that.
So, you know, when you decided to look back at Jenpeg, what was the thing that made you look back, and then what did you find?
Well, you know, here's the thing. I don't know why I started looking back. I just kind of started remembering and started like not obsessing, but it was the middle of the winter and I was writing a whole other book. And I started thinking about winters in Jenpeg and how, you know, long they were, first of all, and how much preparation went into, you know, just existing up there during those winters. And I couldn't stop thinking. And that's when I went online to start researching. And that was the year that there had been a spate of suicides among the young people in Cross Lake in Pimicikamak. And so I became very concerned about that and wanting to know more and wanting to learn more about what happened in the 40 years since my family had been there. And since that dam was built, what actually happened. And I went down this rabbit hole this one night on the internet. I went down this rabbit hole of the news stories because I think it was 2 years before, or it might've been 1 year. I don't remember the timeline, but that was the eviction. It was 2 years before. That was the eviction of hydro by the Pimicikamak Council for abrogating the Northern Flood Agreement Treaty provisions of managing the water level. And then I learned about because I learned about that, I learned about the environmental damage, and there was so much information. And then I wrote to Kathy Merrick, the chief. I went online. I just thought, how am I supposed to find out what is happening? You know? So I went online and I went to the Pimicikamak government website. And it just said the chief, Kathy Merrick, and I knew the name because she's the one who led the eviction. And there was a letter from the Winnipeg Free Press that I read, which is
actually one of our questions is about the eviction notice. So maybe when you wrap up, you could tell them what happened with the eviction notice.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I include her letter to the Free Press in the book. So I just wrote to her. I thought, you know,
she's an awesome
it's cool. There's a woman chief. It's like, you know, Hillary Clinton was running for president over here. So I was feeling like, this is great, you know. So I just wrote to her and I said, I'm a writer and I want to know what happened. And I gave a bunch of questions. I said, I want to learn about these things. And she just wrote back this very brief email, probably because she's a busy woman, but it was elegant. she just said, you should come. She said, I'm so glad that you are reflecting on your childhood in our nation. And you should come. Just come up and we'll show you. We'll explain everything to you. And I thought, like, what do you mean? How am I going to do this? All I remember from my childhood was getting on that propeller plane, and flying through the bush,
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. And the other thing I remember is how long it took from Winnipeg. You drive up to Thompson and then you'd peel off of that road, whatever it is, I forget the name of it. And it was dirt roads 100%. Then it's not anymore, but like before Woboden, you turn off, and then it was like 3 more hours on the dirt roads. And when I lived there, you couldn't get to Cross Lake. There wasn't a bridge. It was fly in only. You could drive the other way into Ontario, but you could not drive to Winnipeg from Cross Lake. So I was just thinking, like, I don't know what I was envisioning going up to Cross Lake, like some Crocodile Dundee or some ridiculous adventure or something like that. And she was like, no, there are planes. You can rent a car from Winnipeg and drive. It's fine. So I didn't, when she said come, it seemed out of inconceivable to me. But then the days passed, and every day that passed, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going back, in the middle of everything, job, work, family, all this stuff, like no plan. And I just told my partner, I said, I think I'm going up there, and he's
great,
like,
brother.
yeah, you need to go. So.
Well, I want to thank you too, as a First Nation person from Treaty 5, for having the interest and looking into it. I'm from Grand Rapids, which is a community to the south. I am, a product of a work camp myself. My biological father, Ron Tremaine, was a guy who went up north to Grand Rapids, knocked up my mom, and then disappeared. And so that was something that happened to First Nation people, along with all the environmental damage and all that kind of stuff. And so, when I asked my biological father about this, he said, the 60s were a different time. But they still produce children. Anyway, but Jenpeg, that was where I met my stepdad. And I can remember, and he's such an awesome dude. And I can remember walking to school, that little tiny trailer / school double wide trailer holding my dad's hand. And I think it was Billy Joe Popovich that said, got a new box of crayons, Mike? And I can remember being so proud of my new box of crayons that I had. It was one of the ones, with the sharpener.
With the sharpener in the back.
So those are all right, brother. Do you remember the school there at all?
I mean, of course I remember all this. I remember Billy Joe. I just got the funny thing is, since the book came out, so my friend Jason is on the
I see it.
We connected a bunch of years ago. Jason and I connected a bunch of years ago through Facebook. And he would say, he posted his class picture, he just mentioned in the chat. But there's also a Facebook group called, something like, I forget what it's called, but it's hydro people who lived up in Jenpeg mostly. And so I was on that Facebook group and chatting with people. But since the book came out, a lot of people from the Jenpeg days have gotten back in touch with me. There is a girl, she's not a girl anymore, but at the time, Alex Bayos, she got back in touch, and her brother, Chris, I was friends with him. And there was some other people. We had friends, Jill and Sean McCaskey. Their father wrote to me. So people are showing up. People showed up a little bit, and a lot of the folks who lived in Jenpeg, we didn't have an engagement with the people who lived in Cross Lake.
Yes.
Listen, I was 5 years old, so I definitely didn't know anything. But I'm just saying in general, like, I don't think people knew. These are also like working people, and in the case of my dad, immigrants. And then of course there were some international people living there too. If you remember the Russian, some Russian families too.
It was a Russian design to the dam, I believe.
Yes, that's right. The technology, because of, I had to learn about all of this stuff in writing the book because of the amount of drop in elevation at the dam site, rather than doing full immersion, they had to do a horizontal immersion because it was something like some less amount of feet.
They can get
drop.
more power, I think, from
more power. Yeah.
Putting it horizontally as compared to vertically.
Exactly that. Yeah. And so I think that even the indigenous people in Cross Lake, there were, so the treaty started to get negotiated early in 1976, I think. The surveying of the river.
Agreement, the Northern Flood Agreement you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. The surveying of the river for potential diversion of the canal to manage silt levels in Lake Winnipeg, the diverting of the Nelson to manage silt levels in Lake Winnipeg started earlier. That started in 1968. In that surveying, they realized, okay, this is a potential hydroelectric site. And so then the surveying converted. And then the treaty started to be negotiated early, like in 74, maybe, I think. But there were indigenous people that were involved in both the surveying, from Cross Lake, I mean, and from Norway House. In the surveying and in the treaty negotiations was all the 5 chiefs. I mean, they wanted to get what they could out of it. They were not like against this technology. They were perhaps mistrustful of it, perhaps wondering how it might impact their communities, but also wondering how it might benefit their communities. Could they get agreements for revenue sharing? Could they get jobs and economic development out of it? And that's all what's in the Northern Flood Agreement, is all that's what they were hoping for. But even though this consultation process was going on, and this is the history of the provincial government and the federal government of Canada's consultation processes with Indigenous groups, even while the negotiation was going on, they broke ground on the dam. They were negotiating treaty, and they broke ground on the dam. It was 2 years later that they signed the treaty. Yeah. So it was already happening in a way. So you have to wonder, like, what does it really mean? And then what power do those chiefs have? They were very skillful negotiators, the chiefs that negotiated the negotiating teams. And this was against the backdrop of similar agreements being made in places like Quebec and Ontario. I mean, it was all happening in the 70s, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so the communities all voted on whether or not to ratify the treaty, with this proviso and understanding that this dam was already being constructed. But they still voted on it. And of the 5 communities, the votes are of various different percentages, but they were all muchly in favor of constructing the dam, because they really thought that it was going to bring something to their communities, with the exception, though, of Cross Lake. It was a very close vote in Cross Lake. It was something like, I don't remember the numbers. I put the numbers are in the book, but it was something like 53% to 47% opposed. I mean, the people were really, really skeptical. In Pimicikamak, the people were really, really skeptical even then that these promises would get kept.
Well, and hydro was,
behold, they were right. 40 years later, they were right.
There was, I can relate some of the First Nation experience of how they experienced what happened from the Northern and Flood Agreement. There was a promise that the First Nations would be hired to, when you flood that amount of land, there's a lot of trees and deadwood and stuff that comes up. The First Nations were told that they would be hired to get rid of that wood. A lot of it is still up there, and the First Nations have not been hired. They've only been hired to clean it up in strategic areas, one could say. In much like the same way when they clear cut a forest, they do it on the back of the mountain away from the highway, and it's the same thing with the bush that Hydro has paid First Nations to take from the rivers. So this causes a lot of problems for the fishermen, in that there are they're going in their boat and all of a sudden there's a log where there shouldn't be a log, or they can't, there's a mile of logs between them and the shore. There's also the raising and the lowering of the water, which the Hydro had told them would not happen very often. It does happen very often, and that has chased away the fish. That has caused silt to build up, and a lot of other things. So there was a lot of parts put into the Northern Flood Agreement that's a lot of First Nations say did not actually happen. And then of course there have been new hydro agreements made up north in the 90s and 2000s that are much different from the Northern Flood Agreement, and how they're building dams is much different from the dams that they were building in the 70s. So there has been change, and Pimicikamak, this will be our next subject, was central into changing the opinion of people in the States who buy our electricity that hydro is green. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so their activism, we talked a little bit about this before we got on the air, but so that they have been activists against hydro being considered green or clean. This is one of the things that Kathy Merrick talks about in her letter against that concept because of the environmental impacts. As you described, the shore erosion has the immediate impact of making the lake difficult to navigate and changes the potability of the lake. In fact, Brian Grover, who was the original surveyor who worked for Manitoba Hydro, he talked about how the survey team drank out of the rivers in the lake. And everyone in Cross Lake, when I went up there to talk to them, said that is what we used to do. We didn't need a sink in our house. We just drank out of the lake. And they cannot do that anymore. It's no longer drinkable. There is a treatment facility in Cross Lake, and people go into town and bring their bottles into town and draw it from the dispensary. But that is not how they used to live for however many generations. And of course it affected the fish. And when you talk about the fish, that changed the food chain, up and down the food chain, predator and prey, everybody. So hunting is different now, and the trapping is different now, the presence of animals, the relationship of animals to the landscape. And so the engagement that you're talking about was some northern states, like Minnesota and northern states of the United States, Minnesota, North Dakota. I don't know if there are others. Those two I do know of. Some of the cities buy power from the Manitoba Hydro. And so Pimicikamak leaders were involved in getting Greenpeace. There were some campaigns in the 90s to get those cities to stop buying power. What's interesting now in terms of the history of activism is, for the book, I was trying to research and find out specific details about who it was that was involved and what happened. And neither the Pimicikamak government nor Greenpeace in Minnesota could help me out with the information. Like some of these conversations, and I mean, the history that we keep of our own social movements, the records, the written records, we have to be our own archivists, I think, because some of the history just disappears now. I don't know who those activists were and who they met with and what the procedures were and what happened, all of that. That's all lost to history, basically. Yeah.
And, I think that campaign was huge in changing how hydro does electricity now, or builds dam now, and that they flood a lot less land. They work out better arrangements with the First Nations and make certain that the First Nations are profiting also from the dam itself.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but that doesn't mean they still can't go back to those nations that were affected by the original, dam. So
like Grand Rapids?
Like Grand Rapids. I know less about that situation, but I do know about the 5 First Nations that were included in the Northern Flood Agreement around the Jenpeg generating station. And four of the communities did settle in different implementation agreements over the course of however many years back. And Pimicikamak is the last holdout. They want full implementation of the original treaty. They want full implementation of the original Northern Flood Agreement, and the province and the Crown and Manitoba Hydro, they will just duke it out forever over who's responsible for paying for all the stuff that was promised. Yeah. They were promised a recreational facility for the community. Of course, that's going to cost astronomically more now than it would have cost then, but they haven't.
The bridge was promised that they had to fight for.
They had to fight for it over and over again. They have a temporary recreational facility that was built according to the municipal plan of Norway House, not Cross Lake, Norway House, which was even then a much smaller community and still is. But it was a recreational facility built according to the municipal plan of Norway House in 1982, and that's what they're still functioning with. And so they have hockey is big in Cross Lake, of course.
Yes, of course.
Brady Keeper, there are these hockey teams in all age brackets in every gender there is. And these people, the rink is booked from like 8 a.m. to 11 at night, every single day, so that everyone who wants to play, all the teams can get in there and do their work. And the machines, which are they too, it's like you watch those apocalyptic movies where the cars are like just like Mad Max or something, where the cars are just rigged together with like spit and gum. They have the cooler that makes the ice, all of this stuff,
Yeah.
That was promised in the treaty. It was promised in the treaty. Yeah.
They've done a lot of work up there. One thing that, as a former journalist, I always, I came across these studies that showed that when areas are flooded, arsenic gets into the water, and arsenic over time, and these studies were done in high levels of arsenic, but arsenic over time plugs the little holes in the pancreas. So there's some question as to whether the hydro dams actually cause diabetes by, putting the arsenic in the water, and over time people drinking it. And I'd like to see further study on that, actually.
Yeah.
So, getting back to the book, Kazim, one of the things I noticed, it was your dad that took you up there, but he's not in the book lots. Can I ask you why?
He's like the intended audience member. He's like the secret intended audience member for this book. I really want to visit him and have a long conversation. And we've had short conversations about it, smaller conversations. And it's like I have had more conversations with other people in my family about this. But I really wanted, that part of it feels really personal, that part of it is, even if it happened yet, which it hasn't happened yet, partially because I live in California and he lives in Buffalo, New York, partially because of, COVID, and, I've not been able to visit, there's a number of reasons why we haven't been able to talk about this. He has read the book. He did send me some feedback and information about life, mostly about life in Jenpeg, and he sent me some info about the technology of the hydro dam, explaining things to me. But we haven't. What's that?
His strength.
Yeah. We haven't had a long conversation such as the one you and I are having now. But I think even if we did have one, the unanswered question of the book is over and over again, lingering question throughout the book is, how am I going to explain this to my father? What will my father think? And my worry, or not worry, but like my preoccupation, let's say, with will the people there forgive me and my family for the role that we played in the damage to this place? And so the answer to that, though, Michael, is for everybody, for all of the non-Indigenous people that were involved in the construction of that dam. It's not singularly focused on my father, it's for all of us to think about. We went up there, we probably, I'm going to just wager this, like, I'm probably sure we didn't necessarily think about it. I don't think we thought of ourselves as settlers or colonizers. That's what we were, but I don't think we thought about that ourselves that way, and I'm not sure my father thought, I am a settler here and there are Indigenous people and Canada has taken their land, perhaps now we'd think that way, with the consciousness has changed,
Yeah.
So the answer to the question, when you ask me, like, what was my father think? Part of why I don't want to answer is it's personal, that it's between me and my father. But part of why I don't want to answer is that it's lets everybody off the hook in answering the question. And it's the question for all of us to answer.
That's a good point. As somebody from Treaty 5, I'm happy that we, welcome Canadians into our territory. But I would have to say that the treaty, that the treaties were not following a war. These were peace and trade treaties. And the First Nation side has basically been bowled over. Our law is not recognized in here. And that is an important part. My mother went to residential school. She was beaten twice for speaking Cree in residential school because of, she went to go help a kid in the playground and the kids started speaking, their mother tongue, and they were both strapped for speaking. So, the treaties didn't work out quite the way we had thought, but yeah, I do, as somebody, appreciate the treaty and that sort of thing. But it can be implemented better, and there can be a better balance to how the Canadian First Nation relationship is carried out. Now,
Yeah, but it's also not wrong for us to think at that time we didn't think about it. At that time we didn't know, but now we do.
yes, well, I would
Now
say
we-
that it
now we
was wrong
know.
at that time.
So what are we going to do now that we know?
Yes, yes,
You know,
I
yeah,
agree 100%.
yeah.
All right, let's see, what else do I got here? You know, that was one of the things that I really remember. You know, my parents moved us down south from Jenpeg, and so like you were thinking about the trees and the stars, but I always dreamed about these gray rocks, these basalt rocks.
Yeah.
And Grand Rapids, where I spent much more of my life, is all limestone. You know, it's you can't, you know, it's you go to Grand Rapids, you get limestone dust on your clothes. And so it was later on when I started traveling up north for my work with the advocacy organizations that I realized, jeepers, these basalt rocks that I saw in my dream are, you know, from around Jenpeg, from Thompson, farther north than what I was used to in Grand Rapids. And so what else did, you know, sort of stuck in your mind as far as the land goes?
I mean, the snow, the snow in the winter was omnipresent, of course. And in Jenpeg, in the town, they used to bulldoze all of the snow into this big mountain. Do you remember it?
Yeah, King of the
in
Hill.
The corner, and we would climb on that and play. I mean, it was like mystery
Yeah.
castle or something. Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. I remember the long nights. I remember
The beach.
the beach a little bit, very little. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Because of the shore erosion. It's all muck now.
Uh,
There were two beaches. There's one that was like right outside of town, like right there. You could walk to it, right? That one's just muck now. You can't even walk on it. And then there was another one by the Monago River. You'd have to drive up to the road and then hang a left, and then a little bit down was the Monago, and then there was fishing. There was like a little beach, a kind of rocky kind of beach where you would sit and fish. And
there used to be good fishing up there.
all the people from Cross Lake would come and the people from Jenpeg would come. And interestingly, I didn't realize it until I started writing about it, but it was not, I don't know if it was segregated officially, but the Cross Lake people would fish, the indigenous people from Cross Lake would fish on the part of the beach closer to the road, and then farther down would be the Jenpeg hydro people would fish there. But that's gone too.
Yeah. Well, you know, in Grand Rapids,
yeah,
you know, when you talk about that split, you know, in that unofficial division, you know, in Grand Rapids, there's the reserve on one side of the river, there's the Métis side on one side of the river, and then Highboard in Grand Rapids is built about, you know, 5 miles out of the town proper. It used to have a big fence around it, and you couldn't get in there, you know, up until the, I think, late 70s if you were a First Nation, unless you had a pass.
Whoa, unless you had a pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning, which was your parents were trying to figure out whether you would be allowed to go to the hydro school.
Well, it was a company town, and my parents weren't, you know, at that time, my mom and dad were dating. So my dad actually had to adopt me in order to make it, you know, in order for me to actually.
They were allowed to live together, but you weren't sure if you would be allowed to go to the school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of the family situation, or because you were Indigenous?
Because my mom didn't work for hydro.
Because she wasn't part of hydro, and she wasn't married to your father.
Yeah. And then the First Nation side was also a factor, right? You know, like, I know you said you didn't experience racism there, but I
mean, I didn't know. It doesn't mean that it wasn't there. I didn't experience it, and my parents didn't cop to feeling any. So that's all we know. Yeah, yeah.
But again, your dad lived on Highboard, so and it was a company town. I don't want to say, you know, but you know, there was a hierarchy there, and even as a kid in kindergarten, I knew that hierarchy existed. But anyway, you know, we are running out of our time. Are there any questions? You can put them in the chat there real quick, and we only got about 4 minutes to answer them. But if you throw them in there, we will try.
Questions from the audience.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone? All right. Well, you know, there was, you know, one of the things I liked about Pimicikamak, and it actually comes into my books, is the house-restaurant. Did you go to the house-restaurant?
No, tell me what that is. I might have gone there and not known what it's called.
It's basically a house. Two ladies started a restaurant in their top floor and move down into their basement. I believe that's Cross Lake.
I went to two restaurants there. They were both in houses, but I don't know if either was the one you're talking about.
House-restaurant is what I call them.
Yeah.
That's not their official names, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what they are. They're, you know, because of the lack of infrastructure for businesses, blah, 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 in Pimicikamak, people have basically turned their homes into the first floor of their home into a restaurant and moved into their basement. And there was good food.
Yeah, I went to there were two different places that I went to, and they were both in people's houses.
Well, you got to make do, you know, with what you got to make a living nowadays. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up, brother?
Yeah, well, I'm just noticing that there is a question in the chat. I just peeked over there.
What happened as a result of the eviction letter? I think you talked about that earlier.
The eviction letter. Yes. So Kathy Merrick led the eviction. They allowed a skeleton crew to stay and run the dam, but they evicted everybody else. The indigenous people who were working there stayed and continued to work. So it was more of like a reclaiming of the dam as on indigenous land, which was one of the promises of the treaty. It was actually supposed to be staffed by all indigenous people, engineers, maintenance, everybody. It just didn't happen, you know. So there was a negotiation and in a tentative agreement in 2016 to provide remediation, returning to the terms of the NFA. But that too almost immediately went into litigation.
All right.
Still ongoing.
There's another question here, Kazim. How did you get started with this project, and what is the inward turning with the pandemic? Was it the inward turning during the pandemic?
Oh, no, all of this happened before the pandemic. All of this, I started to work on this in 2016, 17. I went up there for the first time in May 2017. That is the story of my first trip, is the story that the book recounts. I did go back the following year, and then I had planned a trip. I had a very busy 2019. That's when I moved from Ohio to California, and I started a new job, and a lot of different things were happening. But I was planning a return trip in the summer of 2020. There are two big annual events that happen in Pimicikamak. In the summer, there is a series of festivals, powwows, you could call them, called Indian Days, that happen across the north of Canada. And so in July in Pimicikamak is the big one. And so I was planning to go back for that. The other big event that happens up there in the winter is a dog mushing gathering that happens. And I want to make it back for that as well. But I couldn't because of the pandemic. So I've been.
Well, Jason's actually got you a question here.
Oh yeah.
Jason Gilmore, your buddy. I guess both of our buddies. Actually, this is just a memory that popped into my head. I remember going around the school yelling at, I believe his name's Donald Mallard.
I remember Donnie. Yeah.
Donald believes in Santa Claus. Donald believes in Santa Claus. And as we're doing this, I'm like, shit, I believe in Santa Claus. We were that young. But anyway, Jason is asking, you know, as a kid who lived there, how should I feel about this experience 40 years on?
I mean, we had the experience that we had as children. But now that we are, you know, grown people, we can educate ourselves about what the impact of the Jenpeg Dam is now. I didn't know that the province and that Hydro and the federal government were going to abrogate on their promises in the treaty. We didn't know that the mitigation would go so badly. We also didn't know the full extent of the impact of the shore erosion. Hydro didn't know either at the time. They admit as much in the treaty. It's in the treaty. All parties agree that the full extent of environmental damage cannot be known. So everybody knew, you know. So we can do what we can do now. But I also think it's not just me. You can go back too. You can visit. They're super friendly. There's a hotel. It's right across the street from the hockey rink. Jason, you can go and stay in the hotel and then go across and watch the hockey games. You know, it's a beautiful place. one of the things that the local government themselves are thinking and talking about, not anymore, everything's on pause now because of the public health situation. But one of the things they were talking about was the potential of tourism, the potential of excursion, but to benefit them for, for their revenues, not some external company coming out and setting something up and, profiting off of their riches, their land, their riches. So that's really important.
Okay.
Annie asked this question. I want to answer this.
Sure.
Yeah. Would you be interested in coming back to Pimicikamak to meet students and staff at Mikisew High one day? First of all, yes, 100%. Annie Anderson, if you are a student or teacher at Mikisew, please send me a note, write to me. I want to talk to you. But I did go back. So I went to Mikisew and I met Anna McKay, the principal, and Star Beardy, who was formerly a First Nation Studies teacher there. Okay, so you may be, I don't know if you knew Star or not. She doesn't live, I think she went to Thompson or Waboden, but she was there when I went there. I actually taught her classes for her. She had to go to Toronto this was on my second trip. It's not in the book. But I taught her classes for her when she had to go to a conference in Toronto for teachers. And I want to come back to the school, and I would like to, talk to the teachers, talk to the students, either through Zoom or in person. I definitely want to come back in person, 100%. But before then, too, we should talk about that. I've stayed in touch with Anna McKay, who's the principal of the Mikisew School. I still talk to her, and I've stayed in touch with Jackson Osborne, who's one of the elders in the community. I stayed in touch with Daryl Settee, who works for the government, and he's in the book as well. And I stayed in touch with Kathy Merrick as well, who's not currently the chief anymore. I saw her when she lives in Winnipeg as well, between Cross Lake and Winnipeg, and I saw her when I was in Winnipeg. Yeah, she's really great. She's really great. So well, Annie, I'm just telling Annie. I'm going to send to you in the chat. I'm going to send to you my email, and you can just please send me an email, and I would love to make that happen.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to say goodbye. I really appreciate you telling us all about this, Kazim. I've read your book, and I really enjoyed it. The only problem I had with it was that you called Cree people matriarchal, and we're not. We're matrilineal, but we're not matriarchal.
I'll make a correction.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up, brother?
I just want to thank everyone for coming out and being here. And I want to thank you too, Michael, for chatting with me. I think, all those years ago we were together, and now here we are. We've been brought back together again. So my friend Laylee Long Soldier.
Tell us about that vest.
There we are. My friend Laylee Long Soldier told me that when the elders of Pimicikamak performed their ceremony, calling the spirits of the land to come and help the community after the young people were, dying. Laylee, who's an Indigenous American writer, she told me that the reason I started to think about Cross Lake and Pimicikamak is because that's what the elders did. And I believe that. I believe that 100%. And I believe it because when I was up in Pimicikamak, Jackson and others told me, the land belongs to itself. The trees are part of the citizens of the land. The stones, the water, and it all has a spirit. It all has an animating force. And I felt that, no doubt. I told you that I didn't have very many memories of my childhood in Jenpeg. And then I went up into the forest. And when I got there, I was like, oh my God, this is real. I'm here. This is and then I remembered all of these things, So I just hope that everyone out there, thank you for coming. And Michael, I think we're brought back together as well by this, weren't we? I mean, that's what happened, so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think any of this is an accident. So I think we have a responsibility, all of us, to do whatever it is that we can, whatever small thing is that we can. And Jackson told me, Jackson Osborne, he said, all of this stuff that's happening, the tornadoes and the wildfires in California, and all, the disease, the pandemic, the whole system is out of whack right now. The whole system is off the chain. The energy is not flowing, and I think we're in a critical moment socially and as a planet. It's not science fiction anymore. It's just part of what's happening in our lives. So I hope we can all kind of maybe take that into our daily consciousness and not just think that we have to do a big, huge thing, but do something small and make that a part of our daily life.
Those small things can mean a lot, especially to people up north who are kind of waiting for Canadians to make those small moves and make those small gestures. All right, Kazim, sorry. It just comes into my head, and I apologize. It's because I've been reading, that's what it looks like to me.
There it is, yeah.
I apologize. All right, so brother, I think we'll say goodbye to everybody. We want to thank everybody for participating in this. Please go pick up the book. It's really good, and you'll learn a lot, and I am definitely looking forward to the sequel. All right, John, how did you want to end this?
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. You can't have a bookseller involved in an event without having him talk about books at the end. So I'm just going to very quickly endorse a few things as well. The latest in Michael's series, The Mighty Muskrat's Mysteries, The Case of the Burgled Bundle, is available, as are all of his other incredible Muskrat's mysteries. I was talking to the manager of our kids section just before this, and she mentioned that these are the easiest books to sell to anybody because they're so incredibly well-written, adventurous, and fun. So if you have a kid in your life or you just want an adventure, these are incredible books. I would also heartily recommend, as Michael just mentioned, that you check out Northern Light. The generosity of heart, probing intelligence, and incredible artistry in this book also bleeds through to all of Kazim's work. So if you like poetry or if you're even curious, I will selfishly put in a recommendation for his incredible collection, Inquisition, from 2018, which came out through Wesleyan. It's a tremendous book. This is a tremendous book, and we couldn't be more delighted to have everybody involved in this conversation. Thank you, Kazim. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to all of you here on Zoom, all of you folks out there on YouTube now or in the future as well for watching and for your questions and conversation. It's been wonderful spending the evening with you, and we're so grateful for your time.